Hey guys, here's a little bit of a follow-up from yesterday's video, right? So part of the reason that I've changed some of what I'm doing, what I'm showing, is I've been working with Wiley, obviously, on the next book. We're about to have that published at the end of the month. And one of the things I want to do is just kind of highlight how mechanical this can be, right? Now, I know some of you guys got, a full-time job. I know you're not looking kind of for the swing trade type setups. And this is where you can kind of combine a couple of things together, right? So yesterday's video, which obviously I'll put into the description, I'll see if I can link up to the top um, as well. But look, in the grand scheme of things, right? Something like Euro, which it's really well established, right? It's been around for decades. In the grand scheme of things, what we're looking for is enough info, kind of in past tense, to kind of help us not so much predict where we're going, but to understand where we're likely to want to go next, right? And I think that's kind of a key point. I think a lot of people, especially when you look at the crypto world and so on, newer traders, kind of rookie traders, a lot of people come into the trading environment and kind of almost treat it like a gamble, right? It's kind of a casino type, spin of the roulette wheel rather than, let's understand the market dynamics, right? So yesterday's moves, I was talking about ultimately the liquidity, right? And I went through kind of step by step. What I'll do is I'll put this in just to show. This was from the mechanical video, right? So, the longs and shorts of it was we were up around here. I was expecting a move down. That move down on a smaller time frame was ultimately down and back up, and I'll show this in a second. But what I want to do is just talk about where we are right now, right? And you know, as I've tried to explain, especially to our members, I've done this for a very long time, right? This is, a lot of experience kind of wrapped into one thing. So what I guess kind of looks easy for me to show, it's easy for you to understand, right? Providing you kind of commit the time to kind of break it down. And I've tried to express, on numerous occasions how you break these things down, right? Where the volume profiles come in. This kind of set of videos, this kind of sequence of videos, I'm putting these together to kind of dumb it down, one layer, two layers, even further, right? So what I'm kind of showing here, these techniques I'd class as almost level one, right? These are kind of like entry levels. And these are just to kind of help make these setups a little bit more mechanical for you. Now, when you start adding, additional layers, additional levels, and so on, you can really refine, these setups. Now, this particular one, right? I have an entry around 23. Right? The low at this was actually around 24. Right? So you're talking about a pip away from you. Now, obviously, I'm not in this trade at the moment, right? This isn't something that triggered. I was half hoping it was. I was half hoping that I'd kind of catch this one earlier on, which is what I mentioned yesterday. But in the grand scheme of things, right, the reason that I see this even still coming back, right now, it doesn't have to come back all the way, and it doesn't have to come back beyond the levels, because what I'm doing is I'm now readjusting the kind of entry based on today's information rather than yesterday's kind of guesstimation, right? So what I want to do is kind of refine the setup kind of a little bit deeper. So I'm going to get rid of this one. Now what I'm looking for is any kind of information that allows me to say, hey, where could I enter this if my beliefs are still that we're about to go along, right? So what I want to do is I want to share first of all a couple of things I shared from yesterday. Um, I mean, okay, I've just clicked on this and I'm thinking, even down to this, right? This was a Bitcoin call. I know Paul made a couple of posts. I definitely in the members area. I'm not quite sure about the visitor section, but a lot of people have asked, how do you guys get these levels, right? Well, a lot of what these getting the levels are, it's just kind of emphasizing and showing you where the liquidity is, right? So if I scroll down to find where we were talking yesterday's video, so yesterday's video was this one here, right? Like I said, I'll post this in the description. Now, what we were talking about, right, was the move down, right? This kind of green area, this green box. This is why we were looking for, an area of interest down below. This was a little bit kind of later on. We had the first move down. We then had a little bit of a move up, but we didn't get the move up all the way, right? We just kind of carried on down. We kind of melted down very, very slowly, right? So fast forward a little bit. This was kind of one of the last things last night before having to go. Was I'd mentioned again, kind of in the members area, that obviously the price had a little bit of a pullback I was expecting, and then ultimately let's see how this looks, in an hour or two after my call, right? So I didn't end up coming back to the trades. I just kind of let this fall down, kind of overnight. Asian session seemed to be just kind of slow and steady. So we come up to the level, we've dropped from the level, we've come back and retested the level, right? After retesting the level, we've literally started to fall down, right? So in the grand scheme of things, understanding that there was no, immediate rush. If you really wanted to, you could have taken a short. But in a grand scheme of things, trading isn't about being in a trade, right? Not always being in a trade. So ultimately, when we start putting these pieces together, right, what we're actually looking for is the information as to what next, kind of why next, right? So what I want to do is I'm going to start back out on the larger time frame. I'm going to say my big time frame is ultimately the daily. Right? So as you can see, we've had quite an aggressive drop from the top, right? I could even class this as the very top. We've had a drop down, we've come back and retested, and ultimately just melted down, right? So it's on a daily time frame. So at the moment, what I'm looking at on the daily side is, even if I was to trade this as a pure pullback type of move, right? I want to be looking at where exactly liquidity could be. Now, obviously, I could take the daily and say, oh, we could come all the way back up here, or I could take kind of the sensible trade. I could lock in profits. There's a number of things that you can do, right? And these are the types of things that when you refine how you do, they become obvious to you, right? So, first things first, this particular setup, this particular idea, right, is based on taking the emotions away from an entry, taking the emotions away from trade management, right? So even when you're inside the trade and you've already placed that entry, it's managing the stop losses, moving, trailing, right? All of these types of things. So on the daily, right, I've actually got enough logic to say, hey, we do want or need some kind of pullback, right? Now, this isn't the let's jump in long because I think this is now still going up, right? What I want to then do is drop down to the smaller time frame. Now, on the smaller time frame, what we haven't seen yet is any change of character. What we have seen is a little bit of a slowdown in terms of the move, right? So we've come up something like this, right? I'm just going to draw this kind of rough in terms of where we are. I'm going to draw it straight to the top. We've come down. We've, in theory, changed the character here to the downside, right? And therefore, we're technically in a downtrend from here, right? So what I've got is the daily move is kind of currently down overall. I've got the 4-hour currently down because we've technically changed that in terms of its character. And therefore, what I want to do is I want to look into the smaller time frame as to if the smaller character has actually given any logic for a move yet, right? Or whether or not we get the sweep. So can you see how what I'm actually doing is working with the charts rather than trying to predict, right? The prediction is quite broad. This is where the Elliott wave comes in, the Wyckoff, all the kind of the more advanced tools. But in simplifying the techniques and simplifying the kind of entries, this level one kind of data is enough to give you, some very good entries, right? Now, even on a trade, something like this, we're still talking about a 4.5% type RR on a trade with a relatively large stop loss on a 15-minute time frame, right? So back down to the 15-minute chart. Now, what I said about obviously the 4 hour technically was in a downtrend, right? Now, what we can do is we can look at the downtrend move and we can assess to see whether or not the 15-minute has given us any rationale for a change in that move, or whether this move is ultimately just some kind of pullback, right? So at the moment, we've come up. I'll check to see if we've closed above any of these, right? Which, we might have done. But in the grand scheme of things, what I'm seeing right now is this lacks the impulsive motive for a move to break, up and through, right? So my gut instinct is that this is a pullback move rather than an intent to the upside, right? Now from here, what I can do is I can then start to zoom in a little bit kind of smaller, a little bit closer. I can say to myself, well, we had the last push. If the last push down was ultimately the supply, we've had a nice little rally away from it. We've come straight back into it, nice little rally away from it. We've come back into it, nice little rally away from it. And this time we've kind of failed, right? So the idea for me, the fact that we failed, is that there's still a little bit of interest, still a little bit of an intent to the downside, right? Now, this kind of, reaffirms my notion for why I think this is ultimately a pullback on that time frame. So what I'm looking for is a couple of reasons and a little bit of logic as to why would we drop any deeper than this, or why would we start to accumulate in this kind of region. Well, clearly we're still underneath this supply, right? We've got a little bit of demand, obviously, from here that caused this particular move. However, this move didn't really cause a larger change of character just yet. Right? So these are the types of things that I'm looking for. And this is, again, working with the chart, working for the chart, rather than trying to guess this. I'm taking that kind of guess work out of the equation, right? Now, obviously, what I said about what I'm doing with these webinars, what I'm doing with the kind of the new sequence of videos, this is a lot of data that I've put into the new book, and this is kind of part and parcel of the point in terms of what I'm trying to show. But the general idea is that, step one, level one, you can literally change your trading by just changing how you view and work with the charts rather than try to anticipate the charts, right? So when I zoom in now closer, right, what I've actually got here is we've got a last couple of pushes, right? So this one obviously has come up. We've been technically mitigated. We then come from the last buy before you sell. We've been then mitigated again. So at this particular point, we've actually got the last real move, right, is this one sitting in there, okay? So if I was to get rid of this now, my general idea, I'd love to see a little push into this range and then a failure. And then what I'd like to see, right, now, this one is not the levels, right? So don't take this as the level. This is just the general idea, general concept. Probably could have drawn that with a line, whatever they called, what's that one called? The path tool. Probably could have drawn that with a path tool, but you get the general idea, right? So what I'd like to see now is a change of character to the downside, but in an ideal world after tapping this kind of level, right? So we are talking 6 pips roughly away from where we are right now. We've actually been up as close as only 2 pips away. So I really would like to see that supply being tapped for a bit of an aggressive move back down. Right? It doesn't have to be large, but what I would like to see is, like I said, that change of character to the downside. Then I'm looking for opportunities, right, that potentially give me either this last sell before my buy, right? So back into the zone. We could argue that we've already been mitigated in there, right? So I'm going to drag this across a little bit further. So we could argue that we've obviously been mitigated there. I'm just going to put this back roughly where it is because it's not there for now. Or we're going to start to see the change of character when we come back in to these levels, right? So these are my 2 kind of areas of interest. I think if we break, if we break above this, it's more likely a sweep rather than a, conversion into up. I think this move up at the moment is too dull, too boring, too static to actually make any real progress to the upside. So I kind of think we're going to get another stab at least down to this level, right? Which means if we do, I could probably reduce my stop loss, a hell of a lot. That's a 28% trade, something like this. Now, obviously, I'm not saying I'm going to be this aggressive, but in the grand scheme of things, if we were coming down and we saw the signs, you could probably get a little bit more aggressive than something like this, right? So what I'm looking for right now is sitting on my hands, kind of sat out of a trade. I'm waiting. I'm kind of watching. I want to see some of the next moves. I might stick some alarms or some alerts on these kinds of levels just to see if we break through them. in the next couple of hours. If not, I'm just going to be sat on my hands waiting for a move coming back down, change a character, and then ultimately what I'd really like to see is a more aggressive move to the upside that ultimately ends up taking this out, right? So either which way, I'm still sat on this. This was the update from yesterday's video, and obviously I'll keep you posted and I'll keep this going in terms of especially this particular move. All right, see you on the next video. Thanks for watching, guys.